I guess that in order to ensure peace in this cyberspace, norms and laws are quite important. And since one of your backgrounds is also in the international law, I wanted to ask what are the strengths but also gaps in the current legal frameworks governing cyberspace?
The whole discussion about laws and norms is happening at the moment, where we see a couple of trends that come to mind. One is, for example, the increased sort of like state involvement over internet resources, for example, and data within their territories, or the discussion about the data sovereignty, for example, and the transborder data flows. And at the same time, the sort of like, in a way, against the idea of having a sort of like global internet, really connecting everything and everyone, a more fragmented and sort of like also region-specific internet governance models. So we have the issue of like cyber sovereignty and, for example, regional splinternets in a way. And we have also some sort of like policy divergence, like data protection laws. I'm thinking about obviously the GDPR.
Yeah.
National cybersecurity regulation that further contribute from time to time to fragmentation. And so that's one trend. The other one is that, as we know, I mean, legislation is always a little bit difficult to keep up with the technological advancement, for example. So we have to consider that the speed at which now emerging technologies, obviously I'm thinking about AI, but I'm thinking also about 5G, so quantum computing, or like privacy preserving technologies, are now impacting the governance landscape. Again, they're not moving, I would say, at the same pace, but they are necessitating a sort of like adaptive regulatory and operational approaches. So you have also the speed by which technology is moving. And then I would say there is a trend which I see positively, especially, let's say, for an organization like ours, but at the same time is challenging as well, meaning the multi-stakeholder collaboration. I would say there is a growing recognition of the need for an inclusive governance models that engage diverse stakeholders. I'm thinking technical leadership, for example, organization like EETF or ICANN that play critical roles in managing, for example, IP resources, developing protocols, maintaining the global interoperability. At the same time, the private sector, for example, like we know the big giants, that are holding significant influence, if you think about it, over the digital infrastructure and the data flows. And this is also require accountability frameworks at the same time and enforcement of the accountability frameworks. But then you also have the civil society advocacy. I mean, I'm thinking it's happening in this moment, the IGF in Riyadh, for example. So the Internet Governance Forum, and I'm thinking about the great collaboration that we have with many, let's say, sister organizations, and the possibility for an organization like the CyberPeace Institute to participate to UN multi-stakeholder processes like the open-ended working group. I mean, definitely it's something that it was not happening, let's say, years ago. So this is where we need to situate, in a way, the discussion about international law and norms in cyberspace. I think the strength is that there are established norms for responsible behavior. Instead of reinventing the wheel, let's say, for once, it has been reinforced by critical UN processes like the UN Group of Governmental Experts, the UNGGE, or, for example, the Open-Ended Working Group, the OEWG, that have articulated voluntary norms for state behavior in cyberspace, and repeatedly so. I'm thinking about another critical piece is the Geneva Convention's applicability to the cyber operation during armed conflict, for example. I'm thinking about also about initiatives that are, let's say, multi-stakeholder in essence. I'm thinking about the Paris Call for Trust and Safety in Cyberspace that has been signed by many member states, that is bringing together, for example, also private sector entities and civil society to address global cybersecurity challenges. I'm thinking about like the technical communities. I'm thinking about the mutually agreed norms for routing security, for example, and the growing recognition. I mean, to your point, it's interesting. You're definitely younger than I am. So you were saying that nowadays it's unthinkable that on any, let's say, key international discussion, international security discussion, cybersecurity cannot. The growing recognition that, for example, cybersecurity is having in geopolitical agendas. And I'm thinking about like high-level declarations from the G20, from NATO, regional agreements, like, for example, what is happening in the EU with the cybersecurity strategy. So I think there is this aspect of strength. There are some gaps that are, let's say, notorious mostly I would say in the international, let's say, arena, but also unfortunately at the national level still, which is the enforcement mechanism and the gap in applying norms. And also I would say, because nowadays, and this is why I would say I see it as a positive development, the multi-stakeholder, but this also necessarily is bringing also sort of like fragmented approaches and conflict of interest for the parties involved. There is still, even though the Institute was created, still considering, let's say, civil society or even society at large, when cybersecurity is debated and considered, it's still a challenge, I have to say. And there is still a kind of like challenge in understanding the full spectrum of interconnectedness. If you talk about healthcare systems nowadays, you cannot avoid to talk about cybersecurity, right? So, or when we consider, unfortunately, consideration when it comes to conflict zones, we have to talk about cyber. And then there are also some sort of like technological gaps in governance. I mean, I mentioned before the AI, the quantum, or even like the old, in a way, Internet of Things. They really outpace the development of the legal and normative framework. And so you have some sort of like blind spots. All in all, I would say kind of like promising, more focus definitely on the enforcement and accountability frameworks, but also in technical collaboration, meaning that there are some technical tools that can be used. I'm thinking, basic things like DNSSEC, for example, or promoting advanced encryption and monitoring system to prevent unauthorized access. So very basic things that are still not happening.